I stared at the ticket confirmation on my phone. The excitement that should have been there was completely absent. This trip, one that I had meticulously planned, wasn't going to be enjoyable for me. It never was. "You're saying you can't come on the trip I planned? If you don't come, you're no longer family. It's common sense, isn't it? You married my son after all." That's what Effie, my mother-in-law, had said to me a week ago, her voice filled with the same entitlement she always used when speaking to me. Her words weren't a request. They were a command wrapped in guilt, meant to remind me of my place in her version of the family. Cody, my husband, had looked ready to say something in my defense, but I had stopped him. What was the point? Arguing with her was like walking into quicksand. The harder you fought, the deeper you sank. So instead, I smiled tightly and agreed to her demands. Little did I know that this would be the last family trip with my in-laws, a trip that would finally shatter the fragile illusion I had been trying to hold together. I'm Liliana, 32 years old, and I run a small app development company. I love what I do, even though my mother-in-law dismisses it as a silly side hobby. My husband, Cody, is 37 and works at a bank. We've been married for 4 years, and while our careers are thriving, our personal lives are far from perfect. We don't have children yet, but we hope to, someday, when the time is right. For now, I focus on my work. My company is small but growing. I pour my heart into it because it's my passion, my dream. Cody understands this. He's always been supportive of my career. We share chores, responsibilities, and we value each other's independence. But to Effie, none of that matters. In her eyes, the only thing that defines me is my role as Cody's wife. And in her version of that role, I should be at her beck and call. The problem is that Cody's family doesn't understand boundaries, least of all Effie. She disapproves of how Cody and I manage our lives. We built a house that's perfectly situated between our two families, but instead of appreciating how balanced it is, Effie finds fault. She hates that we keep our finances separate, even though it works for us. In her mind, marriage means no secrets, no privacy, and certainly no independence. I've tried to ignore her constant criticisms, but it's not easy. Effie doesn't just dislike me, she actively resents me. And every time we meet, she never fails to remind me of that, whether it's making snide remarks about us not having children or criticizing my job. But what really cut deep was the time she forced me to miss my best friend's wedding. It was about a year ago. My best friend Amanda was moving abroad after her wedding, and I had been looking forward to celebrating her big day. A week before the wedding, though, my father-in-law Andy asked me to attend an important business reception on behalf of the family. He framed it as a family obligation, something I couldn't refuse without causing offense. I tried to explain that I couldn't miss Amanda's wedding, that it was a once-in-a-lifetime event, but Effie wouldn't hear it. She called me selfish and told me that family always comes first. To my shock, Cody, who knew how much this wedding meant to me, sided with them. "It's just this one time," he had said. "We can make it up to you later." I was stunned, hurt, but trapped. So, I reluctantly agreed to skip the wedding, apologizing to Amanda, who understood, but was clearly disappointed. The business reception turned out to be a disaster. Effie, who always thinks she knows best, made rude comments to important clients, jokes that weren't funny, and the whole event fell apart. We didn't land the contract they were hoping for, and I was left wondering why I had sacrificed something so meaningful for a family that didn't seem to care about anyone but themselves. After that, I started pulling away. I avoided family gatherings as much as possible, finding excuses to work late or scheduling client meetings during the times when Effie wanted us to visit. Cody noticed, of course, but he never pushed me to explain. I think deep down, he understood. But the family trip, now that was a tradition I couldn't avoid. Every year since Cody was a child, his family had gone on a trip together, and after we got married, I was expected to join. I hated it. I hated how I was always tasked with all the planning, the hotels, the meals, the tourist spots. And I hated how, once we were on the trip, I was treated like their personal assistant, not a member of the family. driving them around, making sure everything ran smoothly, and being told to stay in my lane if I tried to voice an opinion. This year, things were about to get even worse. Just days before the trip, I received a call that my mom had collapsed. She was in critical condition, and I needed to get to the hospital immediately. I dropped everything, ready to rush to her side. Cody offered to come with me, but there was something in his tone, something that felt too final. It was as if he was already preparing for the worst, and I couldn't handle that. I told him to stay, and that I'd go alone. When we broke the news to Effie that we couldn't go on the trip, she exploded. Her face turned red, and she spat out her words with venom. "You're saying you can't come? If you don't come, you're no longer part of this family." I was speechless. Cody started to say something, but Effie cut him off, as usual. "As my son's wife, it's your duty to be here, not running off at the first sign of trouble." I was about to snap when my phone rang. It was my brother calling from the hospital. He told me that while Mom's condition was serious, she had stabilized. The doctors said there was no immediate danger, but they were still monitoring her closely. Due to a recent outbreak of a contagious illness in the area, visitors weren't allowed, at least not right away. "Don't rush here just yet," my brother said. "If anything changes, I'll call you. You can visit when things settle down." I hesitated, torn between going to the hospital and fulfilling this ridiculous family obligation. My brother, sensing my uncertainty, asked what was going on. When I explained, he calmly suggested that since the trip destination wasn't far from home, I could still go on the trip and be close enough to the hospital if anything changed. It made sense, but the thought of spending time with Effie and Andy while my mom lay in a hospital bed filled me with dread. Still, to avoid more drama, I agreed. "Fine, I'll go on the trip," I told Effie. She grinned triumphantly. "If you had said that from the start, we wouldn't have had to go through all this nonsense. As long as you understand, if you don't come, it's divorce." Her casual use of the word divorce hit me hard. It was always her threat when things didn't go her way. But this time, there was something different about it, something final. Cody and I agreed to go on the trip, but I made it clear that if anything changed with my mom, I would leave immediately. Effie didn't seem to care. All she wanted was to make sure I was there to fulfill my role as the family's driver and planner. The morning of the trip, I was a wreck. I couldn't stop thinking about my mom, checking my phone every few minutes for updates. Meanwhile, Effie was already drinking, turning the backseat of our car into her own personal party. Cody, to my dismay, joined in. As I drove, my mind raced. I wondered how I had gotten to this point, feeling trapped in a marriage where my in-laws held more power over my life than I did. And yet, I was too exhausted to fight back. All I could do was endure. The demands from Effie continued throughout the trip. "Stop here," she would say. "We need more beer and make it quick." I gritted my teeth and followed her orders, all the while waiting for my phone to ring with news about my mom. I couldn't focus on anything else. Then finally the call came. It was my brother, and his voice was calm. "Mom's doing better," he said. "She's conscious now, and the doctors are hopeful. But she's still weak, and there's a long recovery ahead." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. When I shared the news with Effie and Andy, they barely reacted. "If she's better, why are you bothering us with this?" Effie said, rolling her eyes. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." Andy nodded in agreement. "Exactly. No need to spoil the trip with bad news. We're supposed to be enjoying ourselves." I was stunned. How could they be so heartless? This was my mother we were talking about, and they couldn't even pretend to care. The rest of the trip was a blur. Effie and Andy partied at the hotel, drinking and making a scene while I stayed in the room, silently seething. I couldn't wait for it to be over. When we finally returned home, I tried to put the whole experience behind me. But Effie wasn't done. She showed up at our house the next day with bags of laundry. "You have a dryer, right?" "We don't, so I'll just use yours," she said, pushing past me without waiting for an answer. I was too exhausted to fight. "There's a laundromat with dryers just down the street," I told her. "I'm busy with my own laundry and I need the machine." Effie glared at me, calling me stingy. "Fine," she snapped. "But once you're done, I'll come pick it up tomorrow. Make sure it's finished." I couldn't believe her audacity, but before I could respond, Cody stepped in. "Go to a laundromat," he said firmly. "Liliana is tired and she has work tomorrow. It's not happening." Effie looked like she had been slapped. She stormed out, fuming. For the first time, Cody had stood up to her, and I could tell it had rattled her. But the final blow came days later when Effie returned with divorce papers. She slapped them down on the table along with some ridiculous family contract. "You don't act like part of this family," she said coldly. "It's time to make a decision." I was speechless. What even was a family contract? It was absurd. I didn't even have time to react before Cody spoke up. "I have something to say," he began, his voice steady. "If you keep forcing your views on us, we'll cut ties. Liliana isn't your servant, and I won't let you treat her like one anymore." Effie was stunned, but she quickly recovered, turning her anger toward me. "You've changed him," she shouted. "He used to be so sweet, and now you've brainwashed him." But Cody wasn't done. "You're the one who's been controlling me for years," he said. "I've had enough. If you can't respect our marriage, then you need to stay out of our lives." Effie, realizing she had lost, turned to Andy for support, but Andy surprisingly said nothing. He just stood there, defeated. With that, they left, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Cody had finally chosen me, and Effie's hold over us was broken. In the days that followed, Cody cut financial ties with his family. It turned out that he had been supporting them for years, paying for their trips and helping to keep their failing factory afloat, but not anymore. Without Cody's help, the factory went under, and Effie was forced to find work. I saw her once, working as a cleaner, and though I felt a twinge of sympathy, I knew this was the consequence of her actions. As for Cody and me, we're stronger than ever. We're focused on our careers, and for now, we're enjoying life without the constant interference of his family. We've even started planning our next vacation, just the two of us. For the first time in a long time, I feel like